Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the podcast based on the Thrive Bible Reading Guide. This is the ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive's author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby, and your host, DJ Payne.
G'day and welcome to episode 69 of Thrive Deeper. It is your humble host here, DJ Payne, and as some keen listeners might be aware, I'm not sounding myself. I'm a little bit sick as I record this introduction and outro today, but don't worry. I was in full flight with Matthew Jacoby as we recorded this episode about the book of 1 Peter. If you've been listening over the last couple of months, you would have heard us go through the Gospel of Matthew. That led us into the amazing book of Hebrews. We just finished the book of James, and now here we are in the letter from the bold apostle himself, Peter. And Peter's going to call us to lift our eyes a little bit higher as we go through these amazing books. Keep on listening because we've also got a fantastic offer for all of you Sons of Korah fans out there. You want to get Sons of Korah product half price? Keep listening to this week's Thrive Deeper. Well, this is it, Matt. We are officially at the point this week where we are pre-recording an episode and you are in Europe as this episode goes out.
Can you ring me and ask me how I'm going over there? Ask me, are the kids behaving themselves?
Where do you go on the first? So this is so at the time that this episode goes live, you will have left Australia 3 days ago.
Yeah.
Where's the first part of your trip?
In Paris. We're staying in Paris. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I will have put on a few kilos already. No doubt. Eating pastries.
Now this is not your first trip to Paris.
No. But this is our big, long anticipated family holiday. Yeah. So we'd always talked about taking the kids to Europe. So we've saved up, and this is it.
This is it.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
The great family experiment.
Yeah. All five of you over there. I'm looking forward to following along on social media, on the Instagrams and on the Facebooks, and seeing all the photos and stuff that come out of you guys over there.
Yeah.
It'll be good. And we'll make sure that we link some stuff to the Thrive.
I'll make sure I put lots of stuff there.
I want to somehow work out, while you're over there, I want you to do some sort of Thrive recordings. You know, somehow, I don't know what exactly, but, you know, getting, you know, an interview with somebody over there, or getting something done while you're over there. You know, even if it's just you eating a pastry, talking about Thrive or something, that would be fun. Well, this is it. We've, for this week, episode 69, we are now entering into another book, and we're in yet another book here in the New Testament.
Yeah.
I really appreciate this. We're entering into 1 Peter. We're going to be splitting 1 Peter up over the 2 weeks. And on this week, we're going to be beginning into 1 Peter. And I'm excited because it feels to me like we're at the end of a journey. And let me explain why, Matt, because you're giving me a weird look. We spent a long time in the Old Testament, the end of the Old Testament, talking about what happened to the Jews, and to the Jewish people, and what God was dealing with them. And then we entered into the book of Matthew, which is the most Jewish of all Gospels, talking about Jesus and his Jewishness as the Messiah. We then went into Hebrews, which is a book to the Jewish people, talking about the amazing continuation of Jesus being the fulfillment and even better than all of the Jewish practices in the first covenant. We've looked at James, which is this ancient wisdom very early on from a very Jewish early church. And now 1 Peter is a letter finally to the Gentile believers.
Yeah.
And bringing them into the faith, and Peter spends a long time as a Jewish man himself really connecting this new movement of the church into the Jewish root system
that's right.
that goes back thousands of years.
Yeah.
And I feel like, this is the culmination of all of this preparation here in 1 Peter.
So he's writing to churches who are a mixture of Jews and Gentiles.
Yes.
And so he's... and look, probably even mostly Gentiles by this stage. This letter's probably written around 62.
Yeah.
So by this stage, you've got churches that are mainly filled with Gentiles, but a core of Jewish people. So yes, he's connecting them with their Jewish roots. It is written by Peter,
The apostle.
the apostle Peter. I mean, he's very clear at the start. The opening of the letter states that it's from Peter, apostle of Jesus Christ, and so we should read it as such. I mean, there's a stream of critical scholarship that says, oh no, it's a pseudonymous letter. It was written much later, and they've tried to say, and the arguments really aren't strong. It's mainly this thing of trying to push these things much later than the fact. But they have to actually demonstrate that pseudonymous writing was pseudonymous writing was a thing. Like, people did that.
Now, explain pseudonymous writing.
Okay, sorry. Pseudonymous is when you write a document in someone else's name.
Under a pseudonym.
Yeah, so like the Wisdom of Solomon. This is in the first century. There was a Jewish writing called the Wisdom of Solomon. Now, it wasn't written by Solomon, but it was kind of written in his name, right?
Yes.
Now, the problem is that, yes, pseudonymous writing did take place, but it never happens in epistles.
No.
People never wrote epistles under pseudonyms. So it's the fact that Peter identifies himself, then it's sent with messengers, right, to deliver to a church. There's no way he would ever have got away, or if a author who wasn't Peter would have gotten away with this situation. It's just an extraordinary idea. So look, there's no reason to doubt that, and again, this comes back to perhaps a critical approach to the Bible that says we're treating it as guilty until proven innocent.
That's it.
At a methodological level, I have big problems with that approach.
Yes.
We should be, these people are our family. They paid enormously for the faith. I believe absolutely demonstrated their integrity in so many respects, the early church. We have no reason to doubt that when this guy says it's Peter writing, that it is actually Peter.
Especially since it was accepted by the early church, and it was it had a long history of it being accepted as that. Is that a problem with modern day scholarship where you've sort of got to make a name for yourself? You've got to you've got to go, oh, I've got a controversial opinion that no one's heard before. Or?
Yeah, it's like, what I call methodological doubt is just part of you never accept a traditional view on something. If you're gonna, I guess you got more chance of being recognised. I mean, this is a very probably cynical angle on this, but you got, in fact, to actually, it's expected that you question what the last
generation
what
believed.
the last generation did, and you say no, it wasn't about that. And so things go in circles. So you get this endless circle of doubt. They said this, well, I'm going to doubt that. And then the next generation is going to doubt you, and the next generation is going to doubt them, and the next generation is going to doubt them. So you actually never get to a point of decision.
Yes,
really, on these things. And this was actually Søren Kierkegaard, who's a Danish philosopher that I did my PhD on. This was his problem with methodological doubt. He said the problem with that sort of scholarship that says, well, okay, we're going to come to the text and we're just going to doubt everything that can be doubted. He says that will never end. Yeah. That cycle will never end.
And where does that lead you?
So it's the guilty until proven innocent. Well, that. You never ever, and Kierkegaard's point is, you're never ever going to get to a point of decision in that. You'll always end up, it's like, well, I doubt this, but then someone's going to doubt you, and then they're going to doubt that, and so you get this endless doubt thing, which never enables any spiritual commitment in the end, because spiritual commitment requires us to actually trust what we've received, right? And so as a Christian, I realise I'm part of a family that stretches back to these early days. So if I receive a letter, and the textual traditions are so abundant. There's no reason. We have enough evidence to know that textually that these texts go back to original texts. But if the writer of the text says it's the apostle of Jesus Christ, Peter, here, it's like, I have to have extraordinarily good reason to doubt that, as opposed to needing extraordinarily good reason to believe it.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the methodological decision I make as a person of faith.
Yeah. I love that. That's a great.
And I believe that's entirely philosophically responsible as well.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one. I'm 100% with you. So this is Simon Peter.
That was a little rabbit hole I went down there. But I just I encounter this when I read this kind of meta literature about the authorship and the looking. It's like, oh man, these critical approaches to these letters.
Yeah. Like we know that in the first century, these fishermen of Galilee didn't have the ability to write these letters and blah 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 blah. And it's like, now, hang on. Like he even says, Peter even says in this letter, and this is a controversial thing, I've got this guy who's writing it with me.
Yeah, that's
type
right.
of thing.
Like I've got scribes,
and people go, well, did they really like? And it's just doubting exactly what that means, who it is, and everything like that. But we know that we're going to come to the text, at face value, and accept the tradition that this is Simon Peter, one of Jesus's closest friends, the fisherman, who Jesus turned around and said, your name is Simon, but you're Simon Peter, but on the truth that you have said that I am the Son of God, that I am the Messiah, I'm going to build the church on this truth.
Yeah, I'm going to,
and this is him.
Yeah,
as a leader in the church, and he's writing, and this is another, there's different opinions about this, but we think at this stage he is writing from Rome. He
says from Babylon.
He calls Babylon, which is consistent in the text because he's bringing all these allusions from the Old Testament, into it. So he calls it Babylon, and
and look, he's a few years away from his martyrdom.
Yeah.
This is not long before he's actually crucified upside down. And he addresses a situation of persecution and hardship. Again, the persecution is not yet persecution to the point of death.
Yes. But it soon will be.
But these Christians are being ostracized. And look, there's another interesting aspect about the possible setting of this. He says at the start of the letter, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles or sojourners, however you want to translate that. He says of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia and Bithynia. Now, the interesting thing is we know that those settlements, they were Roman settlements that were populated by people who were resettled there, or either resettled there, but we also know that lots of people were resettled in those areas who were basically evicted from Rome and often on religious reasons. Yeah. So it may well be that these Christians have actually been exiled from Rome, and it seems that perhaps Peter is using their circumstances. They have been exiled from Rome. They've been resettled in these towns because the Romans wanted to create these Roman settlements. And as I've said, Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia and Bithynia, these were all these areas of resettlement, that they were resettled here, and that Peter takes this opportunity to use this as a lesson. It's like, yes, you've been exiled from Rome, and but actually, you know what? You are actually exiles from heaven. Yeah. It's like you're visitors. You're visitors on earth, not just strangers in Asia. Yeah. You're actually strangers on earth. Yeah. So he takes this a step further, because they're obviously concerned about their circumstances. They're bemoaning, quite possibly, if this background element is true, which is a good argument to be made for that, then they're bemoaning their situation. Well, while you're about it, folks, don't get too comfortable on earth, because you are sojourners on earth, not just in Asia.
And he puts the stakes really high right from the beginning, knowing that he's talking to, yes, there are Jewish people amongst them, but he's writing to a lot of Gentiles as well, new believers in this new way, in this new faith. And he's like, I'm writing to God's chosen people. I'm writing to God, God's elect here. Yep. You're living as foreigners in these provinces, but God the Father knew you and chose you long ago, and has his Spirit, and his Spirit has made you holy. And as a result, you have obeyed him and have been cleansed by the blood of Jesus. Like he puts the
Yeah.
stakes right up high
Yeah.
and grafts them in.
Yeah, so remember, it's like remember who you are.
Yeah.
And this is a lot about that. Just remember who you
Yes.
are.
Yep.
You are not primarily Roman citizens. You are citizens of heaven.
Yeah.
And I should just add the note, when I talk about Asia, I mean Asia Minor, which is present-day Turkey.
Yes. Yes.
So getting back to that point, this is an important theme in this. Now, I was interested when I looked at this chapter, and I really pulled this chapter apart, right?
Right.
Because it's quite complicated. It's difficult to read because
It
there are
is.
so many ideas packed in here.
And it's funny. You made a comment, and a few people in church and life group and stuff like that have been talking about the Book of Hebrews, and it's gotten out that Book of Hebrews is one of my favorite books, and a few people have come to me and said, "Gee, it's a complicated book," and da da da. And I'm like, I don't really find it complicated. I find First Peter
Yeah, this is actually a bit
really
more complex.
complicated. Really
Well,
complicated.
Hebrews is complicated in terms of the theology,
Yeah.
because it goes right into the whole temple system. And,
Yes.
and so if you're not really familiar with that and the references to the Old Testament, yes, that can be really complicated.
Yes.
This is complicated for another reason, because it's actually structurally quite complicated.
Yeah.
It's not
It
easy to read.
feels like a lot of random ideas just thrown out there.
Well, it's partly because it's so condensed,
Yes.
and it's packed in here.
Yeah.
But as I pulled this apart, I mean, I pulled out some sort of main ideas, and I actually came away with a sort of a picture that really impacted me a lot. I mean, first of all, he talks about us being exiles, right?
Yes.
Sojourning on earth, but citizens of heaven. Okay, it's like remember who you are, citizens of heaven. Then he talks about. He says that we were regenerated or born again, so that we could receive a heavenly inheritance. So he's pointing away from here and now.
Yes.
He's
Yes.
pointing to something future and heavenly. And then he goes on to say that we're guarded, that God guards us through faith for our future salvation.
Yes.
Because he says in verse 5, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. I mean, that's an interesting idea, because we think, well, we have salvation. Yes, we do. But the fullness of that salvation is still future. Like, let's not forget, this isn't it. This is not what we have now, isn't the be-all and end-all. There are a lot of difficulties about this, because we still live in a corrupt body, in a corrupt world, broken body, broken world, broken nature. And Peter wants us to use the pain of that brokenness
Yes.
in ourselves and in the world to actually point us beyond and remind us, you know what? Let's not get too comfortable here. Let's have the right kind of dissatisfaction about this, so that we don't get too homely here.
Yeah.
Let's remember we're strangers here in a foreign land.
That part of it is beautiful, and the fact that he talks, there's a lot of talk about holiness and what that actually is.
A lot of talk about what in the meantime.
Yes.
There's a lot about in the meantime.
Yes. He talks about, in my mind, when I think of First Peter, I think he spends the first couple of chapters basically talking about the position of believers, the mindset we should have as believers, the worldview, as it were, we should have as believers. And it should be a worldview that is sitting in heaven, right? We should be very heavenly minded. And we think, we got this idea, okay, so if we're this heavenly minded with these aliens, we've got, a thing about heaven, we're going to live in this dramatic lifestyle and it's going to be all this good. No, you submit yourself to everything. You become the lowest of the low here because it's not about here.
It's so good.
And it's so upside down. I'm like, this is really, really difficult, especially in the light of persecution and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, he even says that that in the meantime we can rejoice despite our trials because of that hope that we have. He goes on to say that basically he talks about our rejoicing in these trials because our faith is proven and will be celebrated. It's like these trials are actually proving your faith, and again points to the future, and that's going to be celebrated in the future. Yeah. So it's like live with a constant sense of the celebration at the end. Keep looking to that. And
he made, I love there's a grandiosity of Peter, and I know people like to characterize different personalities in the characters of the Bible. And Peter gets a caricature of this rough as guts sailor boy, hairy. He's often depicted very hairy. He's a man of Galilee. He's putting his foot in his mouth. He's a leader amongst the guys. He's the loudmouth amongst them. And the reason why that's a caricature, I think, is probably going to be true. It's probably true.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, that same type of personality that enabled him to do all the things that we read about in the Gospels and in the book of Acts, when it comes for him to write the letters to the churches here, he uses that same wildness in language in painting these dramatic pictures and really putting the stakes so high.
Yeah.
Really putting the stakes. And I love it right in chapter 1, at the beginning of chapter 1, he talks about those who are believing who have never seen Jesus. You didn't get to see him like I did.
Yeah,
and yet you believe, and you're more special because you did.
Yeah.
And he's like, and then in this overarching picture of keeping on pulling them into the bigger picture of everything, he says, listen, the prophets didn't understand.
Yeah.
And he talks about the Spirit of Christ and the prophets they didn't understand mentally what the Spirit of Christ was telling them as a prophet, that this thing was going to happen with you people.
Yeah.
And now it's happening. And not only they didn't understand and now it's happening, but the angels in heaven are sort of leaning in.
Yeah.
Going,
you're part of something amazing.
Yeah. And it paints the picture so big at the beginning. I love it.
And this thing that's happening, so you're part of something that's amazing. And this thing that is happening is this kingdom of heaven thing. I mean, it's this heavenly reality. And so live in that. Don't get drawn down to the things of the world. So the big therefore, there's a big therefore in verse 13 of chapter 1. Preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So it's look to the future, be sober-minded, ready for action, but look towards the future. And don't be conformed to your former ignorance. And now this is why we think that he's probably writing to a mostly Gentile church, because former ignorance, you probably wouldn't say that about a Jewish people. But there's this sense of you've stepped into something new, you've stepped up, so don't be conformed to that.
Yeah.
So there's this strong kind of polarization that this letter makes between being a citizen of heaven and a citizen of the world. Don't be conformed to that kind of citizenry. Be conformed to the heavenly ideal.
But I also love, and we should take a break here as we begin chapter 1, we will in a sec, but the idea, there's a concept here that Peter seems so comfortable to live in, that the prophets of the early times, of the Old Testament prophets, were sort of saying to God, we don't understand these messages. And it says that they were told, that God told them by the Spirit, that these messages aren't for you, they're for the future people.
Yeah.
And they were comfortable to live in that not for themness.
Yeah, we don't fully know what we're talking about.
Yeah. But it's this concept of them going, okay, I trust you, God. I'm in your purpose. It's not for me.
Yeah.
I'll live this out. And then we get the same sort of tiny little bit of this sort of not for themness in the angels. That the angels don't know exactly what's going on. They're not these omnipotent creatures that sometimes we think, and they're watching these things happening going, whoa, what is going on here? That God is doing something new. And I love, again, this big picture, this mysteriousness of, that Peter is happy to let us live in, that it's not about us, that there's a much bigger thing going on.
That's right.
And enables us to live this way.
Yeah, that's right. It's great. It's great stuff.
It's great stuff. Okay, so here we are. We've entered into 1 Peter chapter 1. Let's take a break. We'll be back as we go into some of the things that this bold apostle calls us to in Thrive Deeper. I've got 3 words for you. Sons of Korah. That's right, Matthew Jacoby's band that he's led for over 20 years now. And they've released a slew of fantastic albums. We've got an amazing offer that you can pick up any album from Sons of Korah that you want, any product from Sons of Korah, whether that's digital or physical, for half price, 50% off the total value of your order. You could order 1 CD, you could order 100. It doesn't matter, 50% off, it's all yours. Now, last week I shared some of my favorite Sons of Korah songs, especially from their early catalogue. And that got a fantastic feedback. Thank you to everybody who reached out and let us know about that. So I thought, why don't I share some of the newer songs of their last 3 albums that I really like. So let's kick it off with this. This is from their 2011 album, Wait. This is Psalm 19.
There is no speech, nor any language where their voice is not heard. Their voice, it goes out into the ends of all of the earth. Their words to the world.
That's Psalm 19 from 2011's Wait. Another song, an absolute classic, is Psalm 23, an incredibly popular psalm. This is from their 2014 album, Refuge.
The Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in pastures of green. He leads me gently to water still, and he restores my soul.
That was Psalm 23 from Refuge. And now let's have a listen from 2017's Fractures album. This is Psalm 68, Part E. That's right, Part E.
The God of Israel, he gives his power and his strength to us. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Well, I hope that gave you a little bit of the taste of the diversity that is the Sons of Korah experience. You can get 50% off any purchase from Sons of Korah if you use the code ThriveToday50. That's all one word, ThriveToday50. ThriveToday50. Write that down. Head over to sonsofkorah.com, click on shop, and then on their online store. Now, wherever you are in the world, this is available to you, whether it's a physical CD or whether it's a digital download. 50% off whatever you want. Couple of things to note, that you can only use this offer once, and this offer expires on Friday, October 25th, 2019. So head over to sonsofkorah.com, go to their online store and use the code ThriveToday50. 50% off, a fantastic opportunity. Maybe it's time to buy some presents for Christmas. All right, now back to Thrive Deeper and 1 Peter. Welcome back to Thrive Deeper, episode 69, where we are looking at 1 Peter, the first letter from this amazing, bold apostle, the Apostle Peter here, Simon Peter himself. And we're just getting into chapter 1. We're sort of painting this big picture about what this is all about, Matt. Now, as you are entering in, chapter 1 and 2, the opening gambit here in this epistle, what has struck you the most? What has really jumped out at you?
Well, as I said last time, it's this polarization that he creates between our life now and what is future, and he creates this contrast, like to identify the temporality of now. Yes. And
you're just temporary residents.
Yeah, you're temporary residents. And it just really struck me because I feel, particularly for us, I mean, we really make our home here, because we can actually build an impressive life here. I mean, he's writing to a group of people that probably have been displaced. They're having a really hard time. And he says, well, you know what? It's only temporary. Because something much better is happening. Now, I think the problem with us is that we get really rooted down here because we make ourselves really comfortable and we build this lifestyle. It's the great Australian lifestyle.
Yeah. Or the great American dream. Or,
or however you want to put it.
Wherever it is, yes.
And so, we really make, we really put our roots down here in a way I think that can be unhealthy, when actually it was enormously helpful for me to be reminded of this and reminded that that I need to live my life like a visitor, and this is how Peter basically wants these people to live in the world like visitors. We're just visiting here. Yeah. Like don't get too comfortable. I mean, and these people aren't very comfortable. So, but that's okay because you're just passing through. You're like campers, passing through this, and it's just, I think that's so healthy for us.
And it's such a reoccurring underlying message through the whole book.
Yeah, absolutely.
He keeps talking about, I think it's in verse 23 also of chapter 1. It was like, you're building a life. He's talking about like the stones type of thing. You're building a life. It's not here on earth. Like it's something not a short life. Yeah. It's not a temporary, like he keeps using, remember there's grass, it's going to fade. Like he just keeps using all of these words about how things are so temporary. And I tell you what, Matt, reading this in preparation for this, in the last, 24 hours, getting ready to record this episode, it's so funny how God makes, time, the timing of everything, when he brings the word to you at the right time. I couldn't sleep last night. I went to bed very late and I couldn't sleep. And I was, it might have been from the movies I was watching, or the food I was eating. I don't know. Maybe it was the Spirit of God. I don't know. But I was praying to God about my legacy, which is what a pretentious thing to pray, in one sense, in one sense, especially in the light of Peter, in that sense. But it's because I'm doing some big picture thinking and everything in my mind, and what I'm investing in, and what am I doing with my time, and what do I want people to think of when they think of my name? What do I want to be associated with? All these type of big things. And I was really wrestling with it and sort of saying, okay, God, I'm throwing this out to you because I don't know. I'm at a loose end. The next day I start reading Peter. And I just laugh at myself. Yeah. I can hear the Apostle Peter laughing at me going, your legacy, schmegacy. You're part of a much bigger picture that you have no idea about, son. This is huger than you. This goes on for eternity. Yeah. And I just was like, what a relief. Yeah. What a relief.
And, we can't, the great thing is that we can, by being a part of God's purpose, we can have a very positive legacy.
Yes.
But it's not about who we are, it's about who he is.
Exactly.
And, we talked about the polarizing thing in chapter 1, that, the world and it's like we're citizens of heaven, not citizens of the world. This kind of polarity between worldly citizenship and heavenly citizenship is brought out in the rock metaphor that's drawn from the Old Testament, chapter 2. So it's like for us, he says, Christ is our cornerstone. But for those who don't believe, he is a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. Oh. Like there's this sense that Christ is this polarizing figure. Either it's just completely ridiculous. I mean, I can remember as a late teenager before I became a Christian thinking, I can sort of see how God makes sense, but the whole Jesus thing, that is just ridiculous. I just, it just seems so ridiculous until actually until there was a level of conviction in my life that I was able to see through my need. Christ is exactly the one that I need. So, and he became my cornerstone, whereas before he was my rock of stumbling. So that sort of polarity, I get that very much.
Isn't it a beautiful thing that you can go from tripping over that stone and then go to realizing, oh no, that is the anchor. Yeah. That is the whole reason, that's a beautiful picture.
And he does, after doing, creating these polarities, and the big one is the citizens of heaven, and we need to continually look to that. He puts a lot of emphasis on who we are meant to be in the world. So it's not just we're this otherworldly people who just bunker down and think about heaven. No, as it says here in chapter 2, verse 9, he says, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. So there's this sense that, the royal priesthood one is a really strong idea. It has a very strong background. It actually comes from Exodus 19, where he says, talks about them, God's people being a kingdom of priests. Even though at the time God would set aside the Levites to be the priesthood, yet before that happens, God says about his people generally, you actually are a kingdom of priests. Yes. And so Peter picks up this idea of a royal priesthood and applies it to these people, that you have a priestly role in the world. You are to be mediators of God's blessing. Now, this is why he's saying you can't afford to identify yourself so closely and get so connected with the world. You need to stay connected with the things of heaven because you are the channels through which God wants to bring the things of heaven to bear on the things of earth and to speak to people this heavenly message.
I can't help but connect, having come, just a few weeks ago from the book of Hebrews, where the writer of Hebrews talking about Jesus as our priest and talking about him in the line of Melchizedek and all this amazing stuff, just having looked at all the priesthood stuff. When he talks about you are royal priests and, you are a priesthood type of thing, you're a nation, echoing back to those things. Wow. It just, and then he talks about, because we have Jesus as our mediation, we're able to bring our sacrifices, our spiritual life as a sacrifice to him. So rich, so rich.
And this actually then forms the context for, the next part. I mean, he talks again about, he goes back to this idea, beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh which war against your soul. Keep your conduct amongst the Gentiles honourable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. So this is now going to lead into, he's gone from the big picture, livers, visitors here. Yeah. It's like respectful visitors. But keep your integrity here. And make sure that your conduct amongst the Gentiles in the world is honourable right now. This is the thing then that leads into the next section, and it's really, really important that we understand this next block of teaching in the light of this.
Okay, so before you get into this, there's a phrase that he uses, and we're reading. I'm reading out of the New Living Translation. You're in the ESV, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
That in that end of verse 12 there, he's talking about how we're living in front of unbelievers and they see our honourable behaviour. And then he finishes off with, and they will give honour to God when he judges the world. Break that down for me, because I spent some time thinking about that when I read it, and I was like, hang on, when God judges the world and the lost are being judged by God, is Peter saying they're going to give honour to God because they have seen our lifestyle? It doesn't mean that by giving honour to God they're going to be believers, because he's saying they're unbelievers.
In a specific sense.
Okay.
This is in a specific sense. So he's saying, so they speak against you as evildoers, and this is where the background, I'm going to talk to this background in a moment. They've been accused of this and that, and they're disrupting society, and so they're persecuting you for this. But on the day of visitation, God is going to, they are going to see that they're wrong, right? So live in a way that they are wrong. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like live in a way so as to vindicate the fact that you actually are God's people, and that will bring glory to God on the day of visitation. Yeah. It's like you being having integrity. Yes. And having no reason for them to blame you will vindicate God's judgment of them and the fact that you are vindicated on that final day. Like it will show God to be
right
in the right.
Yeah.
That's basically what that's saying.
Is it a little bit like is it a little bit like vindictive, or is it a little bit like
Well, again, you see what this is doing is again pointing them forward.
Yeah.
Like they are falsely accusing you. And it's really bad. Like it's really hard to live with this stuff. When you've been falsely accused, you've been punished for something that you're not culpable of. So, but he's saying, but don't expect justice in this lifetime. Hold your integrity.
Yes.
And he points them to the day of visitation, the day of judgment.
Yes.
When justice is coming. So again, this is another way of pointing forwards to the future.
Okay, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay,
So in the meantime, I mean, and as I said, the emphasis here is keep your conduct among the Gentiles honourable, and then alludes to the fact that they are speaking against them as evildoers. Now, one of the things that the Christians were accused of was being socially disruptive, right?
Yeah.
Because there was a certain order to Roman society, and the order was there were strong class order for a start.
Yes.
Slaves were inherently less valuable, and they just, they had to stay where they were and shouldn't think they needed to understand that they were the bottom of the bottom. Women needed to understand they're inferior to men. It's like, and then, now the problem that they had with the Christians is that the Christians abolished all of these dividing lines. I mean, they're celebrating communion, you've got masters and slaves and men and women and different nationality classes all coming together and meeting at the same table. Now we think, isn't that wonderful? Well, they didn't think that this was wonderful. Yeah. They thought this is actually disrupting the order of society. Yes. I mean, the slaves are going to get ideas. If here are these slaves being told that they are inherently as valuable in the eyes of God as the masters, and I mean, there's a lot of implications to that, and they were concerned about those implications. So there were these, and of course, women were seen as equal to men in the Christian community, and so the structure of the household in Roman society, because there were lots of different religions that came in from the East and whatever, and all of them tended to be judged and assessed, legalised by, are they going to disrupt society? And that was judged on, what does the household look like? How do you structure your household?
Yes.
And is this going to be disruptive to our society? So what Peter... The teaching about slaves and then women here needs to be understood in a kind of apologetic context.
Yes.
Right? And let's talk about the slaves one first. Because he's saying, and this is kind of controversial because a lot of people say, well, Peter's just advocating this terrible slave situation, because he says in verse 18, slaves, be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. And this looks like Peter is advocating for slavery. But in fact, what he wants to do, there's something bigger than that he has in mind here, is that he is less concerned about changing the institution. He's interested in reaching the hearts of people, and he wants slaves to take it on the chin and repay back good for evil, so as to bear witness to Christ, so that these people will see Christ in them and see the difference that Jesus makes.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is where this is really tough stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
But it's also should we interject here? This is coming under, again, he's already set up. We got to keep in mind, number one, we are temporary residents here. This is not the final thing. This down here is not the final reality dimension or whatever however you want to call it. Time, even the time that we live in, is not what we. And then his first point is respect authority, respect the people that are ruling over you. You know, actually, they're going to accuse you of things, but live respectfully. And the first thing that he comes to, like you say, is slaves. Now, we hear slaves, and in the culture that we live in, our minds go to a stereotype that we've grown up with about American slaves, African American slaves, in the American South in a particular period of time. But slavery was a different. There's a lot of different slavery. That is a big picture here. Now, again, I'm not trying to weaken it down or make out that slaves were having a ball, type of thing or anything like that. I'm not trying to make out anything like that. But I'm saying it's not as black and white as we want to make out. Is that a
interesting use of words there, given what slavery has been?
Yes.
In the last sort of few hundred years.
That's it.
But yes, it is true. Slavery was slightly different. I mean, there are similarities. Obviously, there are probably more important similarities. Like it is in a way a bad thing, but it was in this society. Slaves were part of a household. So you think in a Roman society, households were not just the parents but the servants as well. And when he references servants here, a lot of them probably were slaves, but they not necessarily. I mean, they were different sort of levels, and it was much more woven into the structure of society. And these slaves really belonged to these households. Sure, often they were mistreated, and Peter, kind of alludes to that can be the fact, but that wasn't always the case. But it was, and this is the point here, it was so much part of the structure of Roman households and the slaves that if things got turned upside down, everyone thought that everyone was equal to everyone else. Well, where does the order... I mean, Romans are constantly paranoid that society... I mean, they did so much to try to keep a lid on the populace, and they had enormous territories, and so stability was the name of the game.
Yes. And...
I mean, the famous thing in the Gospels is Pilate's efforts to keep what he had to do and allow the Jews to do to keep stability there, So stability, the stability of the household unit is all important. So in a sense, what Peter is talking about here is let's keep this stability. And the early Christians always were trying, and you see this in the early apologists, they retorted to these accusations by saying, no, actually, Christians make the best citizens.
Wow.
We make the best citizens because we're not here to rebel. We're not, and again, it's seen as dangerous because they're gathering in large groups. Oh, this looks like, is this a slave rebellion? A lot of them are slaves, is there something going on here? No, Peter is saying, let them have no cause for complaint. Like, let's actually show that you're going to be more submissive, not less submissive. Wow. Not because slavery itself is good or your mistreatment is good, but because through bearing up under your mistreatment, you are going to witness to something. Like there's something, it's not just about you. Yeah. Like we are vessels to actually say something about Jesus. And so he's saying here that we need to look, and it's a difficult message because these people are in a circumstance that we can't imagine. Yeah. So he's saying, look, you got to look beyond yourself. Yeah. Remember, you are on mission, and that mission needs to be put before everything. It needs to be put before what you think your rights are. You think, I'm going to fight for my rights in this situation. No, actually, your rights aren't the most important thing in this situation. It's not like, and this is not devaluing human rights or any, because we need to fight for human rights and all those sorts of things. Now, this is talking to individuals saying, the most important thing is not your rights, but your mission. And sometimes that mission includes you bearing up under oppression and mistreatment and witnessing back kindness and grace and not fighting for your rights to a greater end of witnessing to a new kind of life.
It's pretty full on.
It's tough stuff, actually.
It's pretty full on. But this is the beauty of when we look back at the last 2,000 years of history and it comes to the Christian church, this is why the Christian church can be found in every culture, in every community around the world. And it looks like the culture that they're in.
Because it's not it doesn't disrupt the culture. It subverts elements, belief elements in the culture, but it doesn't disrupt society.
It doesn't disrupt society as in like political overthrow
that's right.
or cultural tear down. It actually enriches the cultures that it comes to and makes the cultures better.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that even in one of the most culturally hard issues for us to wrap our minds around, the area of slavery and servitude and indebted, servants and the people who were born into a household and that was your lot in life. Peter, through the Holy Spirit, Peter is telling us, even in the worst case scenario in this, when you are beaten for doing good, you're beaten in the worst possible way, endure it. You're doing it for a bigger picture, and God's happy with you.
Yeah,
and it's like,
really,
oh boy.
Yeah, and interestingly here, I mean, there's this commendation of them because basically saying that you slaves, you're more like Jesus than anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just because Jesus came and bore up under this suffering. Like he was prioritizing his mission and purpose over his rights, as it were. Oh. And so when you are in this situation of suffering these injustices for the sake of your mission to bear witness in that situation, that you are more like Jesus than anyone. I mean, it's a high commendation here. And this, of course, then relates and flows on to chapter 3.
Yes,
where he then talks about wives and husbands. Now,
because being politically incorrect and culturally insensitive in 2019 is not enough talking about
it's
slavery.
Enormous. This is enormous.
We've got to talk now about the male and female roles of the household, right. Wives and husbands.
And this is enormously countercultural for us and politically incorrect. But we need to understand actually what Peter's concerned about and what he's doing here. Yes. You see, we need to understand the context. So he says in verse 3, and I'll read from the NIV, I've got both translations in front of me. Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behaviour of their wives. So, and then it goes, when they see the purity and reverence of your lives. Now, the situation here, this is difficult because in a Roman household, in the Roman Empire, the wife was expected to follow the religion of the husband. So when a wife came to faith, this was problematic. Okay, if a wife came to faith, it caused issues in the home, and basically what Peter is saying is that the antagonism that her faith might produce has to be endured for the sake of Christ, for the possible conversion of her husband, and so he's saying, that's going to cause antagonism in the home. Now, you don't back away from your faith because of that antagonism, but you need to. So it's not. He's actually speaking to a particular circumstance here, where coming to faith causes this antagonism, and Peter is again like with the slaves. He's saying, you know what, take it on the chin. I mean, this is a hard one because. He's not saying be a walkover or, and we've got to be careful how we apply this because this is antagonism because of their faith. He's not just talking about physical. In fact, he does tell husbands to honour their wives as the weaker partner later on. And actually the statement, we honour them as the weaker part means he's actually speaking directly against physical abuse. Yes, there. So that's dealt with later on in the chapter. Yeah. But here, the submission of the wife is it's like just don't let your faith cause you to break out of these structures. Like you're gonna work within this structure,
Yes.
and you're going to witness to your husband. Like there's a bigger purpose here.
And and I think it's still applicable. It is still applicable for those today who have a mixed marriage in the sense of a believer and a non-believer, which happens quite often. You know, in churches that a wife will become a believer or come back to the Lord at some point, and the husband either falls away or never believes at all. And for some, they will get really distraught or sometimes so passionately, riled up with, the pursuit of wanting to be right, that it ends up ending the marriage.
Yeah.
And then what Peter is sort of arguing for here in the bigger picture is you might be placed into this situation to honour this man in a way that he has to say, I have to,
That's right.
this is transforming me.
That's right. And look, I think this is even strong. I mean, we've seen, in Ephesians, talks about, submit to one another. Wives, submit to your husband. Husband loves your wives, in self-sacrificially like Christ. This is actually going to another level. In fact, in the ESV, it says, likewise, wives, be subject to your husbands. So the step further is saying, stay within those social, it's like with slavery, like they are imperfect social conventions, but it's not, our mission is not to break these social conventions like, we're actually to win people over. And then really the end result of that, by winning people's hearts and changing people's hearts, that ends up changing the social things anyway, the situation. It's like an inside-out approach. So the point is here, as Christians, let's not try to impose change in a forceful kind of way. Yeah. Let's be mission focused. Let's win people over through love and grace. Let's work, and I mean here Peter's basically saying to slaves and to wives, work within these structures. I know they're hard. Work within them. Win people over. Because it's not about your rights, and it's about you winning people over with your testimony and your example. And so that's really what's going. And I know that's still hard. I know it's a hard message because it's like, but they shouldn't, be walked over. And again, he's not saying that. He's just saying, just remember, there's something more important
than
here.
Our rights.
That's right. And it's interesting where he goes from here. And this also is, because this also needs to be seen in this context. He says in verse 3, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and putting on of gold and jewellery, wearing, So in the NIV it says, your beauty should not come from outward adornment such as elaborate hairstyles and wearing of gold jewellery or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. Now, again, there's a cultural issue here as well. Yes. Because outward adornments in Roman times were often perceived as instruments of seduction. And a woman's use of cosmetics often had this association of sort of deception with that. So there is this kind of cultural association. Now, the problem with this is that in the context of a believing wife and a non-believing husband, she goes out of the house, like she's going off to meet with the other Christians, which they did regularly. And if she goes up, dolled up to the nines, it's like, well, how dodgy does this look? It's clearly, it just clearly looks completely wrong. So as part of what he's been saying, as part of bearing witness and, come on, let's not make this harder than it needs to be, there's this cultural element to that too, where, society would perceive that already her going out without her husband or something, that already would be perceived as questionable. Yes. But by leaving her home unadorned, her intent to attend worship rather than, an affair or something,
Yeah.
would presumably be all the more clear. So
And then I love that. And again, this is one of those pictures that Peter uses often in the book here, is tying the new Christians and especially the Gentile Christians into the Old Testament and into grafting us into to the stories of old. And he then says, listen, you will be Sarah's daughters.
Yeah.
You will be like Abraham and
Yeah.
Sarah. You will be like her daughters if you obey, if you be meek, if you be quiet, if you lead this lifestyle. And then he uses that phrase at the end before he speaks about husbands. You are her daughters when you do what is right without fear of what your husbands will do to you.
Yeah, that's right.
So even in the worst case scenario, you're doing what is right in the bigger picture, in this idea of God, and don't live in fear of what the husband will do. And I think there's a quiet revolution in that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is very revolutionary.
Yeah.
Because what happens out of this is a complete upturning of values, and it really is an inside-out kind of revolution. And the reference to Sarah here shows that even though there's a particular cultural situation going on here that makes this specific advice all the more important, yet there are general principles here that are important for all. It's like the principle of submitting to one another, of humility. Well, that's going to, in any situation, that's applicable.
Yeah.
The principle of let's not focus on outward things, let's focus on inward things. Let's focus on inward character and not how we look outwardly to people. Those are bits of general advice that apply in any culture, really, I would suggest.
Exactly.
So
well, let's
that's
finish
important.
up with this. We're madly running out of time. We don't want to leave it with it sitting in the women's laps here today. We need to leave it, as two husbands ourselves here.
Yeah.
We need to serve up us husbands. And Peter does this in just one verse.
Yeah.
In 1 Peter here in chapter 3, in verse 7. In the same way, you husbands must give honor. So in the same way as the wives are doing it, living in this attitude, you husbands must give honor to your wives. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together.
Yeah.
She may be weaker than you are, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered.
Yeah, so this goes the other way. This goes to... Well, this is not just husbands of unbelieving wives. This is just generally husbands.
Yeah.
So the first thing there, and again, it's easy to miss this, he makes the point, and this is in the ESV, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honour to the woman as the weaker vessel. So that's actually, he's speaking to physical abuse. Do not take advantage of her weakness.
I was also, have I got this wrong?
And I'm talking about being physically weaker.
Being physically weaker. But is there also a sense here with that phrase, the weaker vessel, is that it's a more precious vessel, or have I got that? Got that from?
Yeah. But I think he is concerned about physical abuse. Like that's now you don't do that.
Yes.
That's not how we do things. Okay. You honour her because she is the weaker vessel, and yes, there is that sense of preciousness to that. Now he goes on to say, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, in the ESV. Now this is important because he's making a very strong statement in a society where women were seen as inferior. He's saying they are co-heirs. Now that's a really loaded statement. Now you think about an heir in this society. An heir is like the son, the eldest son is the heir. Yeah. Well, he's saying you both of you, man and woman, you are co-heirs. Yeah. So this is enormously countercultural statement here that he's making with respect to the equality of the sexes. It's this wonderfully subversive thing that's happening here. And it would lead, of course, to, people think that slavery was abolished first in the early 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s under Wilberforce and so forth. Slavery was actually first time abolished in the Middle Ages. And it grew out of... it actually grew out of this Christian ethic.
Yes.
And so eventually, of course, things went backwards again, but, eventually these institutions would be completely turned around. But it happened from the inside out, and that's the important thing. So I think there are the keys here, and this is so much like the teaching of Jesus, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, Jesus was just constantly saying, no, we're not going to impose change in a forceful way on the world. It's going to be like yeast spreading through the dough. It's going to be like a little seed that grows into a great tree. So it's going to be slow, but it's going to be absolutely unstoppable, and it's going to permeate everything. And so this is what Peter's talking about here. Like, it's going to be like slow and hard. It's going to involve love, self-sacrifice, and grace. Like, this is the mission. And I think this is just so important for us to get this message. And I've been so convicted by this, because we can just be far too focused on ourselves, our rights, what we want to get out of life. Life is all about God's mission. And we're here, we're sojourners, we're visitors, we've got something to do, then we're going to go back to God. And that's when we receive the fulfillment of our desires. And it's like, that to me is so important, that perspective, because perspective is everything.
Perspective is everything. I think Matthew summed it up perfectly for us there. I told you at the beginning of the episode that the Apostle Peter was going to challenge us with the way that we see the world. He was going to call us to lift our eyes a little bit higher, and I think he's done exactly that. Now, if you haven't got your hands on a copy of the Thrive Daily Bible Reading Guide, then I challenge you to go over to thrivetoday.net.au. That's our website online, thrivetoday.net.au, our home on the internet, and you can order your copies from there. You can get in contact with us, ask us questions, or get any information you need. That's our home on the internet, thrivetoday.net.au. Now, I also need to let you know, sonsofkorah.com is where you head. Head to the shop there at sonsofkorah.com, the online store. Use the code THRIVETODAY50, that's THRIVETODAY50 for 50% off. We'll see you next week on Thrive Deeper.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Thrive Deeper. Matthew and DJ would love to hear your questions and comments about what you are reading in God's Word and in Thrive. The easiest way to do that is to head over to thrivetoday.net.au. Thrive Deeper is on Facebook. Just search and like Thrive Today page for all our latest news. Until next week, our prayer is that this podcast will inspire you to read God's Word and thrive.